Okay, so are you ready to talk about turning leftovers into lunch?
Leftovers into lunch.
Well, not just any leftovers, right? Yeah, I mean, turning agricultural waste, specifically this corn stover,
Yeah.
into edible starch. It's pretty wild.
Like taking those stalks and cobs that usually just rot and turning them into food.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're going to be exploring today in our deep dive. All thanks to this research paper that one of our listeners sent us.
Cool, cool. Sounds like a fascinating idea, turning what's normally waste into something valuable. I mean, these researchers figured out how to basically copy how nature makes starch to make their own. Pretty ingenious.
Right. So let's jump into it. The paper starts by talking about how hard it is to feed everyone on the planet, especially with the population always growing. And they point out that regular farming already uses like a crazy amount of resources, something like 70% of the world's fresh water.
Wow, 70%. That's a lot. So finding new ways to make food that don't use as much stuff is super important.
Exactly. And this research might actually hold the key to doing just that.
Sure.
Plus, get this, the process they're using is coenzyme free.
Coenzyme free.
Yeah, meaning it doesn't need extra energy to make it work.
Oh, that's really cool. So, like, how does that even work?
Well, walk us through the science behind it. How do they turn this corn stover into starch?
Okay, so picture this. You've got the corn stover,
Mm-hmm.
and they take the cellulose, that tough stuff that gives plants their structure,
Right.
and they break it down into a sugar, cellobiose.
Gotcha.
Then they convert that cellobiose into another sugar, glucose, and also some glucose 1-phosphate, which is like a close relative.
Okay.
And then those sugars are used as building blocks to actually create the starch, kind of like what plants do naturally.
But then here's where it gets interesting. They actually had to remove a specific enzyme called B-glucosidase to make
Yeah.
the whole thing work even better.
Oh, so like fine-tuning the recipe to get the best result.
Exactly. And to make it even cooler, they added yeast into the mix. And that yeast gobbles up the glucose and turns it into protein.
Whoa, so it makes starch and protein? Talk about a double whammy.
I know, right? From something that we
Yeah.
just throw away. But the question is, did anyone actually eat this stuff? Like, is it even safe?
Well, they did test it. They fed this starch to mice and looked at their blood sugar to see how fast it was digested.
Interesting.
And the results are amazing. The starch they made was actually digested slowly, which is really good. It means it has a low glycemic index.
So not only is this a potential new food source, it could actually have health benefits, especially for folks with diabetes.
Exactly. And there's more. They think they can even tweak this whole process to make different kinds of starch, like with different properties,
Like what?
like controlling those branching patterns they were talking about. They could make starch for all kinds of specific things, different textures and all. Imagine creating food that's tailored to people's needs.
That would be incredible. And using corn stover instead of growing more crops, that frees up a ton of land and resources.
Exactly. It's like a whole new way of thinking about agriculture, making it less wasteful and more efficient.
Okay, so before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's back up a bit. The paper talks about how they actually figured out the best way to make this starch. And they get into a lot of specifics about these enzymes they used. Where did they even find those? Did they just make them up?
No,
Hmm.
not quite, haha. They tested a bunch of different enzyme mixtures, ones you can buy, to see which one worked best to break down that cellulose.
Makes sense.
Yeah, they wanted the one that would give them just the right amount of cellobiose without turning it all the way into glucose.
Right, because too much glucose actually messes things up. So how they get rid of that extra enzyme, that B-glucosidase?
Oh, they used a special technique, something called affinity adsorption.
Affinity wet.
Haha, yeah, it sounds complicated, but it's pretty clever. They basically used a type of cellulose that grabs onto some enzymes, but not the B-glucosidase, like a molecular sieve separating what they need from what they don't.
Okay, so they've got their enzyme mix ready to go. What happens next?
Well, that's where the yeast comes back in. They actually engineered this yeast to have a special little structure on its surface, like a docking station, where the enzymes can attach.
So it keeps all the enzymes organized on the yeast instead of just floating around randomly.
Yep. They call it an enzyme yeast complex. It makes the whole process way faster and more efficient.
And we can't forget that yeast is busy turning that glucose into protein, right?
Absolutely. It's like a little protein factory.
So we have this corn stover, which is being broken down by these specially picked and tweaked enzymes. Then those sugars are used to make starch and protein with the help of this super yeast. It sounds almost like science fiction, but it's real.
It is amazing, right? And it's not just some futuristic idea. This could actually help with some of the biggest problems we're facing today, like making sure everyone has enough to eat, and doing it in a way that doesn't hurt the planet.
I think this could be huge. But how did they test this in the real world? They didn't just use perfect lab conditions, right?
Right. They wanted to see if this would work outside the lab, so they tested it using pre-treated corn stover, which is closer to what you'd find in a real setting.
Smart move. And what happened?
They were able to digest almost 90% of the cellulose. It's way better than what other people have tried to do with some more stuff.
Okay, now we're talking. But can you actually make money from this? Like, what kind of output are we looking at?
Well, they produced a good amount of amylose, the starch we've been discussing, and yeast protein. And they did it all from that corn stover that would have gone to waste. And get this, they think the cost of making those key enzymes has dropped dramatically, like a million times cheaper than old methods.
A million. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. So this isn't just some crazy idea. It could actually be a viable business.
It definitely looks promising. And the potential uses for this go way beyond feeding people. They were talking about using this technology to create feed for animals, too.
Really?
Yeah, it could completely change how we feed livestock. Instead of growing huge amounts of corn and soybeans just for animal feed, we could make nutritious, sustainable feed using corn stover.
But wouldn't that be a huge change for farmers? I mean, they make money by growing those crops.
It would definitely be different, but it could be a good thing. Think about it. Farmers could make money by selling their corn stover, which usually just decomposes in the field.
I see what you mean. That could be a win-win. Farmers get a new way to make money, and we reduce the environmental impact of raising animals for food.
Exactly. It's like we're rethinking the whole agricultural system, making it more efficient and less wasteful.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Wait, they also mentioned other potential applications, right? Not just food and feed.
Oh, yeah, they talked about using the starch to make things like systems for slow-release drug delivery and biodegradable films for packaging, even stuff for industrial applications like chromatographic fillings.
Hold on, so this could be used in medicine, manufacturing, and who knows what else.
That's the cool part. It's not about solving one problem. It's about opening up a whole world of possibilities. It's about changing how we use resources and building a better future.
Okay, I totally agree that this could be huge, but is it really realistic? Scaling up from a lab experiment to something you can do on a large scale is no easy feat.
You're right, there are challenges, of course. They mentioned that we still need even better ways to make those cellulose cocktails, the enzymes that break down the cellulose.
Yeah, even though they've made them much cheaper, we can always make them even better, especially when we're talking about using them on a really big scale. What about the yeast? They talked about working on those too, right?
Yes. They want to improve those yeast strains to make them tougher, able to handle the rough conditions of industrial fermentation.
Right, because those little yeast factories will be working hard to make all that starch and protein. So there's still work to do, but it's super exciting.
Definitely. It could be a real game changer. But what about the people who actually eat this stuff? Is it even safe?
That's a good question. But remember, they did feed it to mice and check their blood sugar.
Yeah.
And it seemed like it was actually good for them.
Exactly. But they went even further than that. They compared this artificial starch to regular starch.
Oh, really?
Yep. They looked at its structure, its properties, and how it's digested in the body. They wanted to make sure it was comparable to the starch we already eat.
So they were really thorough. Did they find any problems?
Not really. They found that the amylose they created was almost exactly the same as natural amylose.
Oh, right, like that experiment where you add iodine to a potato and it turns blue.
Exactly. They saw that same blue color reaction, and they confirmed that our bodies can break down the artificial starch just like regular starch.
So it seems like they've thought of everything. They have a process that's efficient, not too expensive, and it makes a safe product that we can digest. And they've even thought about all the different ways we could use it, not just for food.
It's pretty remarkable. This research shows how science can solve some of the world's biggest problems. It's about thinking creatively and using what we know about nature to make things better for people and the planet.
So what are the main takeaways for our listeners today? What should they be thinking about after hearing all of this?
Well, I think one big takeaway is that how we make food is about to change in a big way. We're moving beyond old methods and embracing new technologies that can make our food system more sustainable and fair for everyone.
Right, and it's not just about scientists working in labs. It's about all of us talking about these issues, supporting research, and making choices about the food we eat and the things we buy.
Exactly. And this research shows how those choices can make a difference, not just for ourselves, but for the planet as a whole.
Okay, so we've talked about the science, what it could do, and some of the challenges. But what does this mean for the future? What's the big picture?
That's where things get really interesting. This technology could completely change agriculture, making us less dependent on crops that use up a lot of resources, and creating new markets for things like corn stover.
Right. Imagine farms that aren't just about growing food, but also making valuable materials for other industries.
And think about what that could mean for rural communities. New jobs, stronger local economies, and people being able to take care of themselves.
I love that idea. But what about the impact on the environment?
That's a big one. This technology could seriously reduce things like deforestation, water usage, fertilizer runoff, and greenhouse gas emissions.
Wow, so this could be a win-win for everyone. But what about the downsides? Every new technology has its challenges, right?
Of course. The researchers themselves say that there's still more work to be done. They point out that those cellulase cocktails, the enzymes that break down cellulose, need to be even better and cheaper.
Yeah, even though the cost has already come down a lot, there's always room for improvement, especially when we want to use it on a huge scale. What else did they mention?
They also want to improve those yeast strains, make them more robust and able to handle the harsh conditions of industrial fermentation.
Right, because those little yeast factories are going to be working hard to make all that starch and protein. So there's still more to do, but it's super exciting.
It really is. It has the potential to change the world. And that's why it's so important for us to support research like this, to push the boundaries of what's possible, and to work together to create a better future.
I couldn't agree more. This research shows us that innovation can come from anywhere, and even something as simple as a cornstalk can hold the key to a more sustainable and prosperous future.
It's a powerful message, and it's something we should all think about. But speaking of the future, this research has some pretty mind-blowing implications for the future of food itself, too.
Oh, like what? Tell me more.
Yeah, they were able to adjust things to make different types of starch, with special qualities like amylose and amylopectin. They even mentioned being able to change how the starch branches out to make even more custom versions. Oh, wow. So we're not just talking about any old starch, but starch that's made for specific purposes.
Right, and that's where things get really interesting, futuristic. Imagine being able to make food with starch that perfectly matches what a person needs and what they like taking personalized nutrition to a whole new level.
Wait, so are we talking about starch designed just for someone with diabetes to manage their blood sugar, or starch that gives athletes a quick energy boost?
That's just the beginning. Imagine starch-based foods made for people with allergies, digestive problems, or even not getting enough of certain nutrients. We could be looking at a future where food isn't just fuel, it's like personalized medicine.
Whoa, okay, that's mind-blowing. But is that even possible? I mean, how would you even go about making something that specific?
Well, it all comes back to how much control they have over making the starch. By playing around with the enzymes, the yeast, and the conditions of the reaction, they can adjust the starch's qualities really precisely. It's like they have a molecular toolkit for building the perfect starch for anything. So you're saying we could have a world where everyone's eating starch-based food that's made just for them. That's a pretty big idea.
It is radical, but it's also really exciting. It changes how we think about food and nutrition. And when you add in the benefits for the environment, it becomes even more appealing.
Right, we're talking about a system that's better for the planet and could be healthier and more personalized. It's like everyone wins.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this research so important. It's not just about a new product, it's about a whole new way of thinking about food.
It's about using science to solve big problems facing humanity and to create a future that's more sustainable, fair, and tasty.
I couldn't have put it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think we've covered just about everything in this incredible research paper. A big thanks to our listener for sending this our way. It's been an amazing deep dive into the world of artificial starch and how it could change the world.
It really has. And who knows, maybe one day we'll all be enjoying these personalized starch-based meals thanks to the humble cornstalk.
Until then, keep those curious minds buzzing, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Well, it has to do with how they can actually tweak this process, to make different types of starch with specific properties, like they can make amylose or amylopectin.
Right, and they could control the branching patterns.
Yeah.
Right, to make even more specialized types of starch.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Like, imagine if we could create starch-based foods that are, perfectly designed for each person's dietary needs.
Whoa, hold on. Are we talking about like starch that's made specifically to help someone with diabetes manage their blood sugar? Or starch that gives athletes a boost of energy?
Yeah, that's just the start. Imagine foods made with starch that are tailored to allergies or digestive issues, maybe even to address nutrient deficiencies. We could be looking at food that's not just fuel, but like personalized medicine.
Okay, now that's pretty wild. But is that even remotely possible? I mean, how would you even start to create something that specific?
It all comes back to that control they have over the process. By changing the enzymes, the yeast, and how the reaction happens, they can fine-tune the starch's properties really precisely.
So we could have a world where everyone is eating starch-based foods that are made just for them. It's kind of a radical idea.
It is a big idea, but it's really exciting too. It changes how we think about food and nutrition, and when you add in the environmental benefits, it becomes even more appealing,
For
right?
sure. We're talking about a system that could be better for the planet, plus healthier and more personalized. Sounds like a win-win-win to me.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes this research so important. It's not just a new product, it's a whole new way of thinking about food.
It's about using science to solve big problems and to make a better future for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything in this fascinating research paper. A huge thank you to the listener who sent this in. This has been a really amazing deep dive into artificial starch and all its potential.
It really has. And who knows, maybe someday we'll all be eating these personalized starch-based meals, all thanks to the humble corn stalk.
Until then, keep those curious minds buzzing, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.